szeretném felkérni Ragnar Audunson urat, a Oszlói Metropolitan University-nek a most már nyugdíjba vonult professzorát, hogy tartsa meg az előadását. Előtte egy pár gondolatot hadd mondjak Ragnar Audunszonról. Ragnar nekem régi barátom, régóta jól ismerjük egymást a könyvtáros szakmából, és most is a nyugdíjba vonulása után is nagyon népszerű előadó, nem csak nálunk Magyarországon, jövő héten például Portugáliában fog előadni, tehát úgy sikerült elcsípnünk, hogy meglátogasson minket. Ő Magyarországra mindig nagyon szívesen jön egyébként. Magyarország az meglehetősen közel áll a szívéhez, és egy több évszázados, vagy több évtizedes kapcsolat, ami őt Magyarországhoz fűzi. És amivel viszont mindenképpen nagyon szoros a kapcsolat vele, az, hogy ahogy annak idején azt mondta Dostoyevsky, hogy mindannyian Gogol köpönyegéből bújtunk ki, mi könyvtárosok azt mondhatjuk, hogy kicsit, itt Magyarországon mindenképpen, hogy mindannyian egy kicsit a Ragnar Audunson köpönyegéből bújtunk ki, ugyanis nagyon inspiráló, ő hozta létre, hogy erről fog is beszélni, a Low Intensive Meeting Places-nek, az alacsony intenzitású találkozóhelyeknek a koncepcióját, ami arról is szól, hogy hogyan tudjuk egymást inspirálni, hogyan legyen egy könyvtár egy olyan nyitott hely, ahol a gondolatok találkoznak és ahol a találkozásokból érték születik. So Ragnar, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Malte, and thank you very much for inviting me to visit Szentendre and give this lecture on this conference. Budapest, Hungary, and Hungarian librarianship is very close to my heart, occupies a big place in my heart. And Hungarian librarianship has also been very important in my professional life. When I wrote my PhD dissertation in 1990, around 1995, my topic was a comparison of urban public libraries using Budapest, Gothenburg in Sweden, and Oslo in Norway as cases. I must also say that I am very sorry that I am not able to talk to you in Hungarian. We will have to rely on English. I hope that you will understand most of what I say, but I have also promised Malte that I will send to him the complete text of my lecture, so that you don't only have to rely on the PowerPoint presentations, but will have the complete text afterwards. I understand that we will publish a kind of a booklet based on the contributions at this conference. I also must say that I have no ambition or not the competencies to teach you anything about local history and how to do local history work. That has not been my main field as a library researcher, but I hope that I can make some reflections on the role of local history work and local identity work in the overall role of public libraries as, you say, community developers. I think it was in 1997 or something, I was attending Bobcats conference here in Budapest, and at the end of the conference I received kind of a memory medal from the Hungarian Library Association, and on that medal, I apologize for misspellings or misunderstandings, but as far as I remember, the text on that memory medal said that Chakaköny kapcsolata mulva és agyövöre. Is that somehow correct? Yes? That is, only the book connects the past with the future. The book is a bridge connecting the past and the future. And in a way that is important in our context, that perspective which lies in this formulation, it illustrates in a way that when we develop local history collections, well, history is important, but it is not only for the sake of history. It is also to improve our capacity and our possibility to understand the contemporary situation and to understand and be able to meet the challenges of the future. Because in order to do that, we have to understand who are we. And in order to understand who are we and where are we going and what are the challenges, historical knowledge and local historical knowledge is important and necessary. I will organize my lecture in the following way. I will start with some reflections on why are local collections and local identity work important. And my second idea or point is that, well, is related to this quotation from the Hungarian Library Association, that is from local collections, from local history to documenting and shaping the contemporary. And local collections as a platform for citizenship and empowerment. Then I have a key concept in my research, which is the concepts of high-intensive versus low-intensive meeting places. And I don't know if you are familiar with that concept, but high-intensive meeting places, that indicates meeting places where we are occupied with our primary interests and involvements and engagements, that which in a way gives our life meaning. Whereas low-intensive meeting places, that is meetings where we are exposed to other values and ideas than the ones which we cherish, which are our ideas and interests. And one of my major points is that in order to develop a community characterized by tolerance, in order to develop a democratic community, we have to accept other interests and values than our own. We have to accept them as legitimate. And that is one of the main roles, in a way, of a library, that the library is exposing its users to the complexity and pluralism of values and interests in the community. And that is also a point when we talk about local collections, that the local collections should represent, you could say, the different histories. So that, if I belong to a certain subgroup in the community and I am involved in documenting the history of my group, then we can say that that work is a part of the high-intensive role. But when the local collections also expose me to the history and heritage of other groups, so I have to, they are also a part of the local history of our community. That is the low-intensive role, which is important for developing tolerance and pluralism. So these are, you say, my main points. One could also say that when we are talking about libraries and local history, that can be described as the national library role of a local library. The role of the national library is to promote national identity by collecting and preserving and presenting, you can say, that the national literary and cultural heritage of the nation, and make that accessible for everyone. For instance, the national literature and heritage of Hungary is collected and preserved in the National Library of Hungary, and the same thing in Norway. The local library and the local history work of the local library can be compared to that. The local library is vital then in building a local identity or local identities. I will return to that. So, but we can say that this is in a way, the national library role of the local library. Local collections, well, I would say that they are related to the library's role as a meeting place. I already referred to this concept of high-intensive versus low-intensive meeting places. The library's role as a meeting place has become more and more important over the last few decades. We know, for instance, from research which both Marte and I have been involved in. We have done research in Hungary, we've done research in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, on the library's role as a meeting place, and both the general public and the librarians, they are regarding that role, the meeting place role, as more and more important. More and more people are attending events and meetings in the library, going to exhibitions in the library. And I think that is related to a need for local identity. The fact that these meetings in libraries are exploding. It's related to a need for local identity. If we go back 20, 25, 30 years, a very popular slogan was the slogan or the concept of the global village. That is the global village where whether you are from Szentendre or Budapest and Oslo or Stockholm or Helsinki or where you come from, that is not important. We are living in a global village where we share in a way values and becoming more and more similar. And it is correct that we are globally interconnected and dependent on each other. But I think the idea now is that we need to have that interconnection and that respect for each other has to be built on not a global village identity, but a local identity. And therefore people meet, therefore people come to lectures, for instance, dealing with the local history, and that is an activity which is exploding. And giving, as I say, the library's increasing role as a community builder, as a local meeting place, and as an institution promoting empowerment and democratic participation. This work of the library has taken on a new dimension. I would say that local history work is a core activity underpinning the library's core role as a community developer. There has been a concept, I think, in library and information science, or many people have been talking about this 80-20 rule. That is that if you visit two libraries in two different communities, probably 80% of what they offer, for instance, 80% of their collections will be similar. You will find basically the same authors, you will find basically the same literature in different subject fields, and you expect to do that in all libraries. If you go to library A and B and you look for a certain author of national importance or researcher in history or sociology of a national or international importance, you would expect to find him in every library, him or her. But then you have these other 20%, which are more or less unique to the local library. That is, which is unique and which is related to the characteristics of the community it serves, the 80-20. And one can say that to a large extent it is these 10 to 20%, they are vital in developing or identifying the library, making Szentendre a library to Szentendre library, these 20%. The 80% is vital in making it into a library, with the qualities which you expect to find in any library. But the last 20% are vital in identifying it as the Szentendre library, and in a way gives, since the mayor is sitting here, legitimacy to using scarce resources on this library, instead of saying to the Szentendre inhabitants, oh, you can go to Pest because they have much larger libraries. No, this is vital in building and identifying the Szentendre community. And the local collections are intimately connected, or they are a part of this 20%, which are, in a way, reflecting the essence of the library as a local community institution. A main task for a librarian in our society, that is to be a community developer. To develop a library that can function as a community developer. And to do that, to fulfill that task, the librarian, she or he must have a profound knowledge of the community in all its complexity, historical and contemporary. And she or he must have a broad network reaching out to all sub-communities and groups making up the community in question. That is vital if the library is to be a community developer. And it is also a vital part of the library's role to be such a community developer, given the fact that we are living in times where there are very many fragmenting elements. Working with local collections, well, developing local collections is vital in itself. But I think that it is also vital in developing the competencies which the librarian needs in a broader context to be able to fill this role as a community developer, also outside, you could say, the local history work. But, because if you are working with developing local collections and local history, as I will return to, you cannot do that alone. The librarian and the library cannot do that alone, but you have to involve and engage the different communities in the different subgroups in the community. And that means that through that work you will also build the needed networks, and you will develop the necessary trust needed for the librarian as a community developer. And that is maybe particularly important related to, let's say, more or less marginalized groups in society. To establish contact with them, having them tell their stories, document their stories, then you build a network with them, but you will also probably build trust with them. So as I think when we are talking about the core competencies of a librarian, traditionally we say that the core competencies of a librarian that is related to knowledge organization, it is related to reference work, it is related to information retrieval, it is related to the mediation of literature, and of course all that is correct. But I would say that the ability to understand your community, that is coming more and more to the center of the competences which a librarian needs to function as a community developer and as a local librarian. The ability to understand your community and profound knowledge of the community, both historical and contemporary, and deep skills in analyzing the community and develop and adapt services related to that understanding of the community. And here again, local history collections and local history works come in as a part of that. When talking about the library's responsibility for documenting the community or documenting the history of the community, I would say that one cannot just rely on and collect written material from official sources, because there will always be groups and sub-communities without a documented history. The librarians must take on a proactive and independent role, for instance by interviewing and documenting the history of living witnesses from different periods and different social groups and communities in the library's area of responsibility. To give you one example from Norway, in Norway we have an institute for local history, National Institute for Local History. That National Institute for Local History is a part of the National Library in Norway. And they have a relatively small staff of professional local historians. But the main activity of that institute is organizing amateur local historians all over the country to document and they have something they call a local history wiki, where engaged amateur local historians can write history of that will very often be a small part of a local community, for instance, or a subgroup. And I just saw on the website that at the moment they have a project on this local history wiki to document the history of disabled persons. How was it to be a disabled person with physical or mental disabilities in Norway, in a rural village in Norway in the 1950s or the 1930s. But these are histories which are not part of mainstream. I mean, you don't find books about it. Here it is documented by engaging these local amateur historians to write in this local history wiki. But I think it is also a responsibility for the librarian to take initiatives so that the history of the different subgroups in the library can be documented. One example, also from a public library in Oslo, they have used so-called reminiscence work to document local history in a township in Oslo. Reminiscence work, that is a method which was originally developed to as a therapeutic instrument for people suffering from dementia. That is, that if you could stimulate those people suffering from dementia to, in a way, remember their history by showing them pictures, for instance, from the youth, that would stimulate them. But this work in this local branch library was not, they did not involve the people from with dementia, but it involved time witnesses from earlier times in the history of the township. For instance, this history, or this township, used to be, up till the 1980s, it used to be a very important industrial township in Oslo. Now most of the industries have closed down. But they could then engage, you could say, time witnesses from that period to tell their stories and then document individual stories and collective stories of this township from that time when it was an industrial city, and these stories from below was not part of what you can find in mainstream books. That resulted in a theater performance which was shown in the library only not very many years ago. It's called Workers in Iron and Steel, because the industries there were cotton industries, weaveries, and it was on the ironworks. It resulted in a booklet. And it also resulted in some cooperative projects with the local school. That project was called Our Grandparents, where the kids could invite their grandparents. For instance, one immigrant child could invite his grandparent who came from Pakistan in the 70s. Another could invite his grandparent or grandmother who came from northern Norway to find work in Oslo, or a third one, an inborn. So you could have different histories, different local histories presented also, and then you have the bridge over to the children, over to the kids in the schools. So that was the project of grandparents, and this method was also used in work with immigrants. So they had meetings with immigrants and Norwegians where they told each other about their histories, because now the immigrants' histories are also a part of the local community. So that could be, for instance, let's say when Christmas time approached, they could have meetings where people with a history from a long history from Norway would talk about Christmas tradition in Norway, and some immigrants would talk about Christmas traditions in Poland, for instance, because there are very many Polish immigrants in Norway, or Hungary. So it was used also to, in a way, create bridges between different histories, which is now a part of the local community. Yeah, so again, local knowledge is, as I said before, a necessity for the good librarian. To be a good librarian, you have to be able to swim like a fish in the community you are serving. That presupposes also an understanding of the community's history. Let me, when we are now approaching the end, just say some words on identity. That is, in a way, a complex and a bit complicated term. First, our identity, or our identity as human beings is complex. We have an identity related to deep personal characteristics, for example, gender or sexual identity. Social roles, the role of being a parent, for instance, professional roles, and social status, for instance, social class, and finally we have an identity related to belonging to a polity or a community. And that is somehow challenging today. We are living in an age of identity politics, you know. And there is a tendency that people with one identity, they will not talk to people with other identities. We had, for instance, a case in Norwegian librarianship where some people would not promote the books of J.K. Rowling, also the Harry Potter books. J.K. Rowling, is that her name? Yeah. Because she had said something about gender politics, which some with other gender identities found, well, it was, they wouldn't use her books, they wouldn't promote her books. So it is a challenge to, in a way, to build an identity, because a community identity across such individual identities. And that is maybe the task of the library. That has been challenging also in earlier times. For instance, let's say 100 years ago, we had very sharp, in many countries, we had very, very sharp, we had sharp class divisions between the working class and the bourgeoisie or the right. And they had their own sports organizations, their own, so that they, in a way, they had identities with very few bridges. But we managed to build a unifying community or a national identity. And in a way, that is a task for the library, or it is a double task, because partly they must also, in their local history work, open up for and give room to all these different identities. Let the disabled tell their stories, the homosexuals tell their stories, ethnic minorities tell their stories and develop their identity, but at the same time strive for to find the common denominator, which is the local community identity, which is a presupposition for engaging and involving in the community. Today identity politics might threaten to fragment communities. So simultaneously as the library promotes the formation of identities, it must strive to establish a dialogue between subgroups and different identities, also in its local history work. Let me end with this story, which also I think has some relevance for libraries and local history. A couple of years ago, the City Museum of Oslo, they had an exhibition on the period Oslo in the 1970s. The decade from 1970 to 1980, that was, then I was 20 years in 1970 and I became 30 and left the university in 1979. So that was a very formative decade for me. So the exhibition was very, very interesting for me. But in a way, it did not fully cover my experiences and my history. Because the museum, they present their material by curating exhibitions, that is by telling stories. An essential trait in librarianship is that a library provides people with material allowing them to tell their stories. That is important, and that must be utilized also in local history work, that people are stimulated, integrated, invited into the library to tell the story of their group. The library provided the material. I think that's an important method also, and that will lead to empowerment, and that will also, I think, be essential in building networks and building trust. So I have let me end with these words, and once again, thank you very much for having invited me to this conference, and I wish you good luck with the rest of your discussions and presentations. Thank you.